Oke, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Perkenalkan, sini saya Muhammad Fitri Anda dengan NIM 31081721013. Di sini ingin mengerjakan tugas tentang membaca chapter 5 yang mana adalah dynamic testing. Oke, mungkin langsung saja kita mulai ya. Oke, jadi this chapter describe the process of the testing software by running it on a computer. It uses example to illustrate various way to specify a task case and exit criteria. Dynamic testing is based on a black box, white box, and experience-based technique. We explain what each category mean and how to choose the appropriate one for your situation. Okay. When we talk about the software testing, most of people imagine that it involves running a program on a computer. The term dynamic testing helps to clarify the situation. The test object has to executable and is fed with input data before it is run. Because a low-level test object are not usually executable, dynamic testing requires use of a unit test framework. The test object will usually use a predefined interface to call other component, which are simulated by a placeholder called stub or mux if the component themselves are not ready yet. Stubs simulate the input or output behavior of the component they present. Okay, ada subject atau test frameworknya. The test framework also provides the text object with the input data, which usually requires simulation of the component that is we call the test object. The task is performed by a test driver. The test driver and the stubs make up the test framework that are together with the test object from a executable program. The test framework is usually developed by a tester, which either from scratch or by adapting the interface in a generic test framework to work with the current project. Once a executable test object is available, a dynamic testing can begin. The test objective is to verify that a specific requirement or a fulfilled with the implement component, and to identify any failure of the deviation from the requirements. The object is to use a little effort as possible to test as many requirements and identify as many failures as possible. To achieve this objective, you need to develop your test case systematically. Fully structured by a good reaction. Testing won't guarantee that all real world situations faced by the test object will be tested. Okay. This following step of the dynamic testing, like define the test condition and the precondition, and the objective you wish to achieve, specify individual test case, and define the test executable schedule. This step can be executed in informal and documentation or described here. Formally, the degree of the formality of the process depend among other factors on the plan system usage. The maturity of the development and test process, time constraint, and the skill of the team members. Starting at the test basis, like a general test condition, you need to analyze which aspect of the system require dynamic testing. The objective for verifying fulfillment of system requires to scales are then defined, with a particular attention paid to the risks involved in the system should fail. Any necessary precondition and constraint for dynamic testing have to be identified to, for example, the availability of the appropriate data in the database, traceability between individual requirement and their corresponding test case enables to use to analyze the impact of the change to requirement on the testing process, like example, designing new test case, discarding redundant test case, or modifying existing test case. It also enables you to define a degree of a coverage as an exit criteria of the dynamic testing. In the practice, the number of the test case required can lie in the hundreds or even thousands. The traceability makes it possible to identify which of the these are affected by a change to the requirement. In order to design a test case, you need the input value of for the test object, which can be derived using the techniques described later in this chapter. A test case also needs to fulfill any precondition and must include the expect result and a post condition. In order to decide whether it has a detect a failure, The accepted result must be defined and documented before the testing is executed. If you don't adhere to these rules, an incorrect test result might be interpreted as a fault tree, thus allowing a system failure to go unnoticed. It usually makes sense to execute multiple tests in a sequence, which tests are performed and their sequence is defined in execution schedule, which usually lists a task case thematically according to their objective. Disparate and technical or logical dependencies between test and regression test case should also be included in the plan. Assignment of the test case to individual tester and the test scheduling are also part of the test execution schedule. The sequence are usually automated using a script written in a chosen programming language or a similar notation. A test script can also include a precondition and a comparison between the expected and actual result. As an example, the unit is a test framework that facilitates the coding of the simple Java test script. There are many techniques available for systematically deriving and design a test case. These are generally divided into the black box and white box categories. Experience-based testing technique and can also use to derive test cases. Black box techniques can be applied to the functional and non-functional tests. As the name suggests, and the point of the observation for the black box test is outside the test object, and you need to know knowledge of its code or inner structure, apart from the choosing input data or the setting appropriate precondition. You have no influence over the test itself. Black box technique can concentrate solely on the test object input and output behavior. The design of the test case and the test condition and the choice of the test data will depend on the specification and one use case and user stories. Software and system components are often designed using a formal and informal model, and both can be used to systematically derive appropriate test case. Test case can also be used to identify the discrepancies or deviation between the requirement and their implementation. However, this benefit can only usually be realized in a systemically derived test case using the black box technique. You can stop testing once you have to achieve the degree of the coverage of the test item in the test basis. A minimal exit criteria might be defined as a performing at least one test case for each requirement. Okay. Unlikely, a black box techniques, white box techniques focus on the structures and behavior within the text object. This is why white box techniques are also known as a structural or the structure-based testing. Okay. Here to test case, test condition, and the test data are derived from the test basis as well as requirement, for example, to define an expected result. The test basis also includes the information about the code base, the system architecture, design detail, and other aspects of the structure of the components you are testing. Running a test analyze in the inner state of the test object lies within the test object like that. In the exceptional cases, you can intervene the object operation. For example, if you can provoke the desired operation error using the component on interface, you will have to perform hard a set of operation. In other words, the point of control is within the test object. Test cases can be derived from the structure of the application code or specification. The objective of the white box technique is to verify a specific degree of the structural coverage. You can then increase the degree of the coverage by systematically deriving further tests. White box test techniques can be applied on the lower component and the integration test levels. A system test that in the best of code make a little sense. Black box techniques can be used on all test levels or technique that define the test case before the coding or by defined black box technique. Most the test technique belong clearly to one or other of this type. Techniques that include the element of a both are often referred to as a gray box technique. Oh, okay, that's a gray box technique. Experience-based test technique leverages the know-how and experience of the tester, developer, user, and other stakeholders to design test case, the test condition, and the test data. This approach also uses knowledge of the software plan uses, its environment, and the probable type and location of a fault in this test object. A specific degree of the coverage is difficult as a certain and therefore cannot be effectively used as an exit to iteration. Experience-based techniques are often used in conjunction with white box and black box techniques. The following section go to the more detail on the black box, white box, and experience-based technique. Okay, 5.1 black box test technique. Because a black box has no knowledge of the inner working of the test object, test cases are defined from ideally are already part of the specification because they are derived from the specification like requirement or system behavior. This is a technique or also referred to a specific based on the behavior based a complete test sequence that cover all possible permutation of input data values is impossible to perform. You have to select an appropriate set of a test case using a technique outlined below. Okay, here is an absolute number of a possible concrete input value of the input data. It's defined into the partition called classes. An equivalence partition contain all the data value then the tester accept the test object to process in the same way. In other words, it assumes that testing only one member of the equivalence partition is sufficient. Alongside partition for the parent input, you also need to create partition that contain invalid input values. Okay, noted. Okay, that's like a parameter. Okay. Now discount they have a process up to $2,000 discount 5% is okay. Okay. Okay, this is valid equivalence partition and representative. Okay, you need to create equivalence partition with the invalid input values and test these two. Okay, like this. Just studying for our example, we use the following invalid equivalence partition. Okay. To systematically derive test cases, you first have to define a range for each. For each input variable, like a function or a method parameter, okay, this range constitutes the equivalence partition for all valid input values, and the test object has to process them all according to the specification. Value outside of the range belongs to the equivalence partition of invalid input values, and you also need to check the test object behavior using this. The next step involves fine-tuning the equivalence partition. You have to establish any element of the equivalence partition that, according to the specification, are processed differently are assigned to the new equivalence partition. You then need to keep splitting the equivalence partition until each requirement has its own corresponding partition with from which representative is selected for testing, as well as a representative. Its test case includes the accepted result and, if necessary, any precondition required for the test to run. The principle of the breaking things down can be applied just as well to output value. However, deriving a test case is more difficult because you also need to determine the corresponding input value that result in each representative output value. Additional equivalence partition for the invalid output value needs to be established too. You can build equivalence partition for any coherent data element used by the test object. This can be internal value time related values or interface a parameter value that checks during the integration testing. Make sure that every input-output value belongs to the only one equivalence partition. You need to take care when dividing values into the equivalence partition and the selected representative, as this strongly influences which test case are performed And therefore, the likelihood of the successful identifying values derive equivalence partition from specification and other document is definitely non-trivial task. A high-quality task case, the boundary of the equivalence partition, where the ambiguities and inaccuracies in the requirement are often found, it is difficult to formulate versus a mathematical situation using Written language, and this will make it tricky to decide which a boundary value that belong to which equivalence partition. The Written requirement less than $5,000 can be represented by versus value five, I mean a 50 of $1,500 within the equivalence partition or outside, and additional test case using X equal $1,500 could reveal a possible misinterpretation and a hit hero and discovered failure. Okay, this 5.1.2 section goes into the detail on boundary value analysis like this. Okay, this is a table of a 3 equivalence circles with the integer input values. Okay. Not that unlike the word mathematics, the value range in a computer is limited by the given maxima and minima. Using the value outside of this range usually causes a failure as they cannot be processed properly by the system. The equivalence partition of the invalid value is a map up of a value that's numerical. Okay. Unless it's smaller than the range boundary values, if we assume that the method can resurrect the same with the invalid value, for example, exception handler understand the error code not valid, it is sufficient to assign our the invalid input value as a detail equivalence partition, called the NEA, not a number. Uploading employing a number are equal to the partition is to assume that the input value such as 3.58 also returns as an error message. In this case, we don't need to form any equivalence partition as our incorrect input produce the same result. However, the experience the tester. Wait, I will make sure. Okay. The input values, however, as well as will include the test case for a floating point number of for the check the system doesn't run non-integer input values or up or down and use the result of subsequent calculation. It's a great example for experience-based test case. In a was a case of positive and negative values need to be handled differently, so it makes sense to further divide the equivalence partition for the valid values. The 0 is an input values that often causes failure. Okay, jadi for example, the partition which is a random representing other variable situation for the equivalence partition for invalid values in the end, equivalence partition including the average 7 values integer parameter extra. Okay, the integer or infinite value we use to, for example, makes it simple to build equivalence partition and select representative as well as an element data type. Data value range can be a map on composite data structure for object set. Here too we have to select appropriate representative. Okay. Okay, this is a case study of selecting input value from a set. This following example have to illustrate. Okay, bundle is still for the each customer like employees that don't train senior and this requires a more separate. Okay. Test case is the process data test for the requirement is a resulting calculation need to be tested for percent show value for the dream okay. That's a test case name. A test object will usually have more than one input parameter. Equivalence partition provide at least two equivalence partition for each parameter. When okay, for the valid and invalid values, and there's at least two representative test input values. When specifying a test case, you have to assign an input value to each parameter. So you have to decide which of the availability representative can be combined to the from and an input data set in order to provoke all the necessary test object recreation reaction. You need to observe the following rules when combining representative for the political transportation. It is have to cover a possible combination and representative. As of this, okay, in a representative value and valid equivalence partition should only be combined with the representative from other valid and equivalence partition. In other words, every invalid equivalence partition equals a additional data negative test case equal. Okay. The total number of valid test cases in the door for the product of the number of valid equivalent partition parameter is double multiplying a combination can quickly produce hundreds of valid test cases for the just a few parameter. It is very possible to deal with so many test cases. So we need to apply rules that help to produce their number. Okay. Setuju. Just like a combined representative from the all test case and sort according of the frequency of typical user profiles, then prioritize them according to this sequence. Reference is a given a test case that cover boundary value of the combination of our boundary values. Make sure that every representative equivalent partition is all combined of the representative in order equivalence partition. Used in a test case, the minimum requirement should be that every representative occurs in at least one test case when combine the representative from the equivalent partition with the invalid values. Okay. The representative from the invalid equivalence partition are not combined multifactorially, and invalid values should only be combined with the valid ones. This is because an invalid parameter value triggers on the exception regardless of the other parameter value. The combining multiple invalid does not a single test case quickly leads to mutual fault masking, with the only one of the possible exception being triggered. Furthermore, when an exception does occur, it is not clear which of the invalid value because it is unnecessary for their analysis ensues. That is step 1 to identify the range, like a double best price, a vehicle best price, a double special price for a special edition markup double like that. Okay. This is the table of 5.5, the valid invalid equivalence partition for all metals parameter, like a best price, special price, extra, and discount. Okay, the step 2 is a file tuning equivalence partition based on the specification. In order to define this equivalence partition, we require further information about the expansion of the method, which is gleaned from the method specification. So the following statement for the relevant to the test. Okay, there's a 3 point. Okay, again in the requirement, this was the functional specification which require a number of tester fails the gaps by making plausible assumption based on the common sense of the testing experience. Okay, this is able to assume the bar process partition will occur to the resolving dash will be the partition and processing complete all the conditional the test response based assumption all covered. It's like a parameter. And equivalent partition are representative like that, to 20,000. Okay, so step 3 is selecting representative and step for combining test cases. Like this. Okay, the for valid partition, combine invalid partition. Oh, okay. So like a combine with the invalid partition for the valid for a valid participation. Okay, there's a defining exit criteria, and exit creation can be defined by the relationship between the number and test case value and the total number of equivalence of partition, like if it covers the number of tested EVs, total divided total number of the EVs multiply 100 100%. In our example, 18 input value equivalence partition are deriving from the specification of which 15 what is the name? I forgot, are uses to build test cases which is equivalent partition of 83%. Okay. The greater the degree of coverage you aim for, the more of thoroughly the test object will be tested. The coverage figures define the desired depth of the testing and uses the reference creation to check that requires the testing object have been achieved. returning over or example above if the test plan is fine equivalence partition covers of 80%. This figure is achieved and equivalence partition testing is complete when 15 out of the 18 possible test case has been executed. For example, shows how important the composition of the input data into the equivalent partition can be, if not all the possible equivalents. The partition and their representative are defined. You have to achieve a higher degree of the complexity overall based on the incorrect number of the equivalent partition. In other words, and apparently, a good result doesn't accurately mirror the actual outcome of the test. The test case you built using the equivalence partition are only as good of the amount of care you take in identifying and appropriate equivalence partition. And there's a benefit of and limitation. The formation of the equivalence partition ensures that the specific condition are limited or overload during testing and that an unnecessary tests are performed. Unnecessary testing, a test orders or the user input data from the an equivalent partition that has already been covered and thus produce the same behavior in the test object, as well as input and output data for the method and functions equivalence partition, and we use the test internal value and the state, the base value, and interface parameter. They can use the use of for system integration and component testing. I think that's a good one. However, equivalence partition can only be used to the test individual input or output condition, testing dependencies or interactions between these conditions is more difficult and involves a complex the composition of the equivalence partition of the number combination of the resulting value. However, when used in conjunction with a boundary value analysis, it can be extremely effective testing technique. Okay, there's a 5.1.2 boundary value analysis. A boundary value analysis provides as a useful addition to the test case determined using the equivalence partitioning. This is because of what the accurate boundaries of equivalence partition with where prone specific case occur. A test with the boundary values and other reveal purposely uncover the defect. Boundary value analysis can only be applied if the data is set in equivalence partition is a numerically ordered or can be at least partially. Okay. Defined using the sum of kind order, the boundaries themselves have to be clearly in the table. The test case include the precise boundary value and the two neighboring values. While floating point a number are involved, you have to select a suitable degree of computational accuracy that equates to the smallest available increment of the in each direction. Okay, it's a boundary default. Therefore, yields three test cases if the upper boundary of one partition coincides with the lower boundary of the next. The corresponding test case coincide. Like this. In the many cases, there's no real boundary value as a boundary value actually lies within one of neighboring equivalence partition. In such a case, it is usually sufficient to test a boundary using a two values that lie just outside and the equivalence partition on either side of the boundary. Okay, as a side note to test or three when the test occurs to 24 and 1999 and the 25,000. So you can need to add the case. The boundary value the question is have to answer the question. Example version the corresponding evaluation for inclusion which boundary value can we also check whether the condition is held correctly and boundary should be evaluated. Probability is value true, false, and false, and the rest corresponding program type or the getted testing the value of up to 5,000. Efforts to provide no additional benefit as a also to by the education course and develop specialization bring information when you follow the technological values through us to participate in the course we have to we can do it other testing and we to the toss in the for if you want completely like erroneous expiry separate the true false and true. So indication I have to 25001 show triple the call query the values are 24999 and 25000. I do for the accept the result. Particular result false or the toss of false one. Qualification to the verification and the will be for a certain one next section. Okay. Okay, you always have to decide when the two values are a suspicion and when you need three to test a boundary value that defective code if can be resolved by code reviewer. The query test non-equality instead of a boundary value. However, the default is still easy to overlook only a boundary value test with the three value. As every boundary is a curtain to reveal every effective implementation of the query. That's the case study integer input. Uh, the case is the value min 1, a test of the maximum value in the equivalence partition EEP is also minimal under selected income balance application instrument performance. The testing input the justification to decide whether put the effort for testing boundary in our example. The task is given to because minimum and maximum of value to equivalence partition and value. Okay. Mean underscore int integer plus one it makes integer mean one. Okay. Now boundary value in the set. If you use the input value potentially buyer in the example above, we cannot determine the boundaries for the input value range. Mathematically speaking, the input value has to be selected from the one of the four elements of the set, like employee, student, trainee, senior. There are no identifiable boundaries, and it makes no sense to order of the member of the set according to their age. Okay, here. The student can be of any age, so it is more likely that the person of just status equals. Okay. The boundary values for the equivalent to equivalence partition populate with the output values. The test case they have the same way the test case can be derived from the equivalence partition. The valid boundaries within an equivalence partition can be combined to build test cases, and the valid boundaries have to be tested separately and cannot be combined with the other invalid boundaries. In the example described above, a value from the middle of the equivalence partition do not need to be tested if the both boundary value within the partition have already been earmarked for the use in test case. Okay. There's a table 509 to boundary value calculate price considering the boundary like test case. Okay. The sector result of boundary value testing is always a clearly defined test object. Specification as an experiment tester therefore has to be defined according target behavior using the available test case. Case 15 is equal for test case 16 7 the export result. 16 7 into 20 is max double need to okay. This example so clearly the effects that imprecise specification can have on the testing. If a tester get information about the parameter range directly from the customer before setting up any test case, the overall testing effort will be reduced. Yeah. Okay, this customer provide the following information. The best price lies between, especially edition premium, there are to 25 optional extra with the prices. The maximum dealer discount is 25%. Forming equivalence partition for lesson number is in the following valid parameter value for the boundary testing. All the value is will combine the test case for this. Okay. There's like a valid parameter, a value for boundary testing. And this is a lie outside that equation. Okay, equivalence partition. This object would be obvious. The precise specification provide a clear that result and record. Adding a test customization and boundary values like a maximum double, min double, and so on. And it's recommended. Okay, it's recommended. This ensures that any potential value is classified by hard implementation and successful. Here, you have to decide whether the boundary has to be tested or to other three input values. The function for the review also redirected by an input queries and the two input values that they're therefore suspicious. Defining X criteria as a B equivalence partition as a measurable degree of the boundary value, LBV, a coverage can be defined as an exit criterion or BV coverage. Number of testing in BV, divide the total number of a BV, multiply 100%. Note that calculation includes the boundary values that are directed neighbors on either sides of the boundary, but their only unique values are used because they are covered by only one test case. A coincidence of value from a neighboring equivalence partition called as a one value. Here is a benefit and limitation. The boundary value analysis is most useful when used as combination with the equivalence partition as an error at the boundaries of the equivalence partition are the more common. That one best of value from the middle of a classes about a technique of a good degree of freedom in selection, concrete test data. Boundary value analysis may appear simple, but determine the relevant boundaries is a complete text or complete text. Okay. The selecting appropriate boundary test data requires a high degree of creativity, especially when analysis isn't based on the purely numerical data range. Okay, steps of testing alongside the input data. Preceding step in the program flow also influence output and general system behavior. In other words, you also need to pay attention to the history of the page system you test. The step the model and test diagram are used to have a design a state transition test. Based on initial states, a system or the test object can adopt the values on a new state. Okay. So functional and call of the system input even leads to or two or more potential transition from the single state. We have to differentiate clearly between them using guard condition. That's a clearly define which transition follow the event. A change in state may trigger action and complete the event is said to be an end stage transition or a model using the state transition diagram and or state transition table. Okay, just like a side note. So jadi there's like a do update. Okay, vehicles also after being off. Current situation is more or less this is test session developer vehicle software object is equivalent to the table. It just shows as a successful step for every state. So you can to table is the first possible implementation. That's what expression testing and is enabled to us unify ranges system value. State of transition test object can be a complete system with a various states or in an object-oriented system, OOP. Plus like object-oriented system or as a class with the various states. A state transition test is required every time the historical system of law leads to different behavior. With some test case. There are various possible levels of testing roughness of the minimum requirement should be that the test object reaches or it's a possible state in our example. That's why engine of engine on this following this case. Yeah, that test case one. However, test case doesn't cover of all possible even if the minimum requirement also state that all even have to be triggered. The test case are above the extent that they include the task criteria as a useful task creation to aim for triggering every possible event from the each stage of at least once. This way you can be sure to verify the stage model match the specific system behavior. In a critical system, the transition included the table of the button specific for the state diagram needs to be tested through. For example, we could test whether the update check like, even can be triggered on engine on the hard. Okay. Initial stage, ya. First engine off. Just can adapt it to the update mode. Then start engine on, the engine stop for engine off and start in the car bar battery voltage. Okay. And it's a number of steps between the initial and stage. Okay. Precision stage testing is a useful technique for the system testing graphical user interface or GUI. Usually it consists of a whole raft of the mass dialogues that the user navigates using the main menu commands and the keyboard's input or the clicking button. So mass or a dialogue about is treated as a states and input transition 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 transition. You can model all the navigation option using using a finite statement, and you can derive suitable task custom conference criteria using the technique described above. Okay. Okay, this is a transition tree for our example. There's a vehicle and vehicle for a mini golf not cancel. Oh, this is a transition tree. Yeah. The copy definitions including this is the following aspect of the what's happened before. Easier to determine so the current state of our result change in the optimal variables. Okay, bisa kita providing for the individual task case. If any exit criteria same technique they have look personal state exit different the actual copy test cases. I leave critical application subject for the further distinct states of organization tests such as a possible combination of okay. Association if a possible sectors of using all the available states. Well, for this depth of testing with its huge number of test cases make it difficult to achieve an appropriate degree of coverage. It usually makes sense to restrict the number of combination and organization sequences. Benefit the limitation, the stage transition tests are useful for for any situation in which states influence the behavior of the system or where functionality is affected by the states of the test object. The other testing techniques we have discussed can do this because they don't account for the effect of the system flow in the time of the current state of past activity produced. Decision table testing. Techniques the techniques discussed so far view multiple input parameters separately from one or another, and the test cases are designed on the basis of individual values. The dependencies between the various input parameter and their effect on the test object output are not explicit part of the test case specification. Okay, side note because effect grabbing test case standard. Oh. with the ISO 29119 standard. ISO 29119. Also, the step of pressing the testing as a level where we can okay, so is also the describe input the combination input values in the compare and input and non combination therefore is was a hold of throw and as to what corresponding expected handle analogously and recording with rapid freezes. The customer code insert valid, the correct pin is entered as maximum the trade pin, money is available. The possible reaction, I think is about the card is reject. There's the actually enter. Oh yeah, it's a reaction because the card is reject, and after re-enter the pin, the card is authenticated, and the user has to enter different sum of money. The money is typed out. Then there's a reaction. Lakukannya ulang ya, okay. Because of the comprehension. Okay, that's a test case of the 8 yeah. So this like a okay. Okay, there's a decision tables are often created without the help of cause-effect graph. They are often used during the project specification to have a clarify certain situation. That's based on the decision tables serve to identify an interesting combination of the input values that are likely to cause a system failure. Decision table are the ideal for recording complex business rules that the system must implement correctly. A different combination of a condition usually cause a verifying result, and this can be used systematically tested using a decision table. In its simplest form, every combination of the condition yield a test case. However, the condition can influence or preclude each other, making a combination redundant. Decision table structure. The upper portion of the decision table content causes the lower portion of the effect. The columns of the right define the individual test situation and combination condition and their expected effect. Decision table divided into the four sections. Okay, there's a four section like upper left, so like causes condition, like can be answer yes or no. Upper right is a possible combination of record the end result is n combination. Lower left contain all the effect or action. Lower right contains record of which effect or action should be provoked by which combination of causes. The different tables considered as a follow. All condition that affect the issue never mind. This condition equals a single on the upper level of the table. Order function have to determine the including the individual or lower left or a possible combination of a condition recorded upper corresponding to step evidences the combination of a condition. Order result which action should be resolved from the edge across X indicates the action will be executed multiple across the causes of the possible or even multiple action or required. Every condition should be corresponding at least one yes and at least one no in the table. Okay. The decision table is complete when every possible combination of the condition is included. The table thus has many columns as a combination. The columns that contain impossible combination or possible but not acceptable combination can be deleted. The table can be further consolidated if a different combination of a condition lead to the same result. Once you have with the unwanted cases, every column reflects the test case and no combination and or action or a duplicate. Decision table can also be checked in completeness, freedom from the redundancy and consistency. Okay. For the example, there's a to basic principles of corresponding. This is upper part. And also in the combination of a condition, like a yes or no. In the test case 1, yes, yes, yes. Test case 2, yes, yes, no. Okay. Because the valuable to corresponding that can okay. Can see this is decision table including don't care cases. Yes, no, and X. Okay. The table can be Now consider the test case one, or the individual can be treated as one as a the can test cases 2 and 7 and 8. The result is following decision stable with a total for of cases, test cases is which leads to the different cases sequence of action. It's a simple social review condition or definitions we can quickly for this large and complex decision table. Okay. Task case this techniques enables you to input condition and definitions and the corresponding expected action for each test case directly from the columns of their decision table. The table defines a constraint test case. If necessary, it can be augmented with the precondition, postcondition, and constraint before testing begins. Define the exit criteria. So with all the other techniques we have looked at, it's relatively simple to define exit criteria for a decision table-based test. The minimum requirement should be that every column in the table is covered by at least one test case. This ensures that every meaningful combination of condition-based reaction is tested. Okay, there's at least one test case in every column in table. Benefit and limitation. The systemic and higher format technique often reveals combination of the condition that other test case creation technique overlook. This technique can help to reveal the gap in the requirements, but you have to be careful not to unintentional reject relevant test case when consolidating the table. As we have already seen, a decision table can quickly become every large and unwieldy with the increasing number of the condition and corresponding action. This makes the process difficult to handle without the support of a dedicated tools. This decision table states can be applied on all test level in any situation in which the system or the components behavior depends on the combination and condition. Okay, there's a pairwise testing, so combination testing. Was testing. Oh, there's an was testing like a combination 1, 2, 3, 4, and parameter is true, 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 and the order is the false, true, false, false, true. Okay, there's a Boolean input parameter. How do all this? If you have a look at the following of combination, you can see there's like a combination 1 is true, true, true. Combination 4 is a true, false, false. Okay, there is a 4 combination. Okay. There's a four combination give us a following situation. If we look only at two parameter, we see there's a parameter pairing A or B, B or C, and A or C. All the four combination is cover a true, true, or true or false, a false or true, and a false or false in the order what for combination resolution. Okay. To clarify the process, I have to more also tables in testing for variable and bisa under ball support ball support. Okay. Replacing stable spot people station which is in front version of the computation type routing can be cover of the all possible pairwise combination. Okay, it's a test case like a test case one table tennis, yes or no. Okay. Table tennis no, yes, yes, no. It's like a combination. Okay. The example shows a combination occur more often than order. For example, for the table tennis or gymnastics, yes, yes, no, the combination is also clearly an interesting combination as a no sport. No, 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 or yes, 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 sport. Okay, this is for sport is yes, 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 and for no, is a no sport, is a no, 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 no. Okay. So let's move for combination. This is more than this is solid discussing of parameter. Okay, this is like orthogonal and covering arrays, orthogonal array, counting every division. A little bit of math. For simple import, you will have to combine for spaces of orthogonal, which is two-dimensional arrays which every combination columns are multiple so analysis. Orthogonal is similar to orthogonal arrays, but a difference every combination. So we are therefore not fulfill the specification of earlier required by the picture of the testing the output that becomes smaller. Minimal optimal resistance to possible combination is to reduce to its absolute minimum noise particle. So it informs the possible for the height of limitation combination carrying the same number of the test Vn of with the conference array on its table. Okay. There's six combination, okay? Six combination for a very minimal open covering arrays and transfer the mathematical extension as follows. And wise testing. Per analyzing method to discrete combination of a parameter of values includes an example the any section hand heating this is equal to example of example of the pair. This is however a pair and with as a testing dan doesn't guarantee the even distribution only ensures that there is a pair or choose at least one. The object of a various testing to identify a this is another possible. Okay. Right. There's a study of spark plug over various type of spark, like the example. That is a continue from the back. This example to illustrate the US testing for the combination of parameter. And that's in the test case 6. Is it yes, no, yes, no? You can see a text is about the combination for or combination. Oh, jadi ini kombinasinya ya. Too much, yeah, not too much stick to the practical application of it. Some people have also considered for simple analysis testing can be used and drastically reduce the number of the required test case to illustrate the principle. Let's take a look at sample to the power support design. Combination if testing is combination takes 1 second. Testing all the possible parameter would be 1.7 days out of testing time. Visualization potential test case considering following each possible which parameter. If consistent at least one test case, we can we're gonna selecting the parameter with the highest value and it 10 cases on the system also 10 cases small selection available. Okay. Stuff it. The combination parameter possible test case is one. Oh, every possible parameter value occurs in at least one test case. 1 second combination. Okay. That's not 1 second. 2 to 1 as 1 as combination. My bad. Two combinations so for 2 second parameter we can at least 100 test case to allow physical combination of the color handle to the process combination. Okay. Test case and then test case 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. Test case is accepted. So as personal table for contents are ordered 100 test cases. But for the outlook website your software test knowledge, the test case number are taken from the online tables. The sample table is combined only one and it's available. Colors the model 1 engine 2, model 1, frame 1, model 1, and a summer model 1 and white models classes. It's also engine 2, frame 1, engine 2, so engine so on. Okay. With this 100 test case and each vehicle types combined with each variable of the parameter. Bisa di-combine dong dia. At least one sama two of all parameters too if it's text color. What about the trace combination? So about the combination of parameter of visible values. So 80. So 18 this is the from the combination. Engine 3, engine 4, and engine 5. Oh, okay. test case for trees combination trees index expert expert no, expert first cases necessarily combination parameter test case combination to the first combination the receiving the of 500 test cases. Wow, will be X house testing. QA leaders combination. Okay, these QA leaders have to decide whether to perform the 1S combination or like a 3S condition combination. Also send three. Okay. Just a side note. As just the rows and the confirming arrays is a combination of the input and the confirming test case. Similar the test was a failure, but the parameter have to necessarily define a potential recommendation have to be recorded and structure result not defined in case of it to be about technical event. Basically, each parameter value tested like by at least one case or possible combination of parameter values and combinations to reach separate test case. Okay. Suppose if a value have a single test case, it is easy to separate requiring the text. Example, every parameter of the classification of polymer. Oh, okay. This is based on the example with the table yang parameter is on, okay, like a table 5. Then combination. Okay. Yes, we would only need to use combination at 1 and 8. Is it of complete or compressed or okay. I was thinking is often the best compromise on test testing. So technique itu mana number test case aku okay and why sir this couple testing whether is based on 2 3 for combination as well as tester result is depending on for the test. The example is all the 3 combination as part of this. Possible combination in the and by one and once the value is about cost it's involves a lot of them effort as simple for testing is particularly check and benefit and limitation using the symbol of process with practice. Combinatorial test design is a technique for a deriving test case. Statistical computing possible combination parameter as a paralysis using sheets in the practice. So we that is drawback. Drawback, yeah. Some combination are like not like choose combination. There's not test case in all like local categories of sport. Mm-hmm. There's test case one. All other test case include some combination of 3 categories of sport. There's no test case of this combination. There's no test case include all 4 categories of sport. No test case of the which no categories of sport are cycle. There's only one test case. They combine 2 categories of sport like a test case 6. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. This part of this object and versus testing capable to test multiple parameter test needs to be aware of the pros and cons of technique and if necessary adapt or augment result augment the resulting test outcome remember is no single technique okay remember this is there is no single testing technique that can reliably identify all the defect in the system. We always need to apply selection in testing technique of the suite to the test object in at hand. Oke, jadi nggak ada yang apa ya, itu tergantung dari tes objek yang kita tangani seperti itu. Testing tools testing. Oke, German language open book for the testing for consultant combination with objects and the use case testing, use case. Apa? Sudah. Oke, go back use case testing. Use cases in the business class are often used to determine and calculate system requirement. That's why generally result using the use as case diagrams. The diagram describe a typical resources and interaction with specific environment. Here's a vehicle selection. You want a VS auto system. This is a configure the customers just like a soft type vehicle. Okay. Use case diagram usually defeat the external view of the system and self clarifies user a view of the system is relationship to the other connected system. Hence, and a simple drawing such that the stick figures in the diagram will indicate a relationship with the external entities such as people or other system. Use case diagrams can include a wide range of the other symbol and shapers, but these are not a part of the book remit. Every use case defines a specific behavior and an object can execute it in a collaboration with one or more other entities. Use cases are described using interaction and activity can be automated with the pre and post condition. The natural language can also be used to extend the distribution of the form of the comment of or addition to the individual scenario and the alternative interaction between the external entities and object can lead to a change to object states and the interaction to observe can be illustrated data using our 430 diagrams and business process model. Every use case is a subject specific threat and cause condition does need to be met with the use case of the successfully executed. For example, one of the preconditions for a vehicle configuring is that the customer is allowed on the system. Post condition come into the play once the use case has been run. For example, once a vehicle has been successfully selected, the configuration can be ordered online. The sequence of the use cases within the diagram also depends on the pre and post condition. Yeah, wait. Wait a minute. Use case diagrams of the test basis when designing. Use case based test because this type of test model and external view of the system is highly suitable for the system and set testing. If a diagram model interaction and dependencies between individual system component, it can be used to develop integration test cases too. Okay. Seeing normal system usage, use case diagram illustrate the usual or most probable a sequence of the event and their alternatives. So the tests derived from them are used to check a typical system uses scenario. If a system is to be accepted, it's important that it work error-free under normal condition. This make user a case-based test extremely important for the customer. Therefore, for developer a testing too or a tester too. A use case often compromise multiple variants of its basic behavior. In our example, when a variant in the selection of a special edition, which in return makes it impossible for the customer to select any other optional extra. The more detailed test case can also be used to model specific special cases in and or handling as well. There's a test case, every user selects a specific test there's a further activity or alternative action and post condition or the present following action execution to design the test case you need to know. The initial situation required possible in any relevant constraint in the expected result and the required post condition. However, the specific input values and as result for the individual test case cannot be directly derived from use case. Each test case has to flash out with appropriate data. All the All alternative scenarios shown in the use case diagram extends like the relationship have to be covered with the individual test case too. Test case design on the basis of the use case scenario can be combined with the other specification-based testing techniques. Yaitu defining exit kriterianya. On the possible exit criterion in that is used or a sequence or use case of a use case. In the diagram is covered by at least one test case because the alternative path or extension or use case two. This creation demand on that alternative or extension is okay. The degree of the coverage can be measured by defining the number of the user variants also tested by the total number of available to use case. So the degree of a coverage is usually expected as a percentage. Benefit and limitation use case based on the ideal for the testing typical user and system interaction, making them ideal for acceptance and system testing for example. Exception and a special case can be illustrated in the use case diagram and can be covered by additional test case. However, there is no simple methodical way to drive for the test case that covers it. Oh, okay, there's no simple. There is no simple. That are beyond scope. Because the situation like this, you need to use others technique and accessibility. Okay. Okay, we need to like other technique like such a vulnerability value analysis. Other technique-nya nggak ada syntax test, random test, smoke test. Oke. Like we know smoke test. Security technique minimum test object kayak di PPT. Okay. 5.1.0 5.1.7 evaluation of the black box testing. Evaluation. While black box testing technique are based on the requirement and or a specification of a system or its component and their interaction. If requirement includes error, erroneous definition or an erroneous specification was used as the basis for the implementation, black box testing will not reveal this defect. This is because there will be no deviation between the erroneous requirement and the system equals behavior. In example, okay, the test case object behaves as a specific, and even if the specification in erroneous, if a tester uses common sense and a few requirements critically, erroneous requirement can be identified when designing test case. Otherwise, you will need to schedule reviews, okay, to identify inconsistent inconsistencies and a defect in the specification. Black box technique are also not able to check whether the test object has other functionality that goes beyond the actual specification of the reason for security issues. There is additional function or neither specific nor or there is a customer requirement and a test case because not to acceptable or not perform coincidentally, if at all, the coverage criteria determine when testing is complete or the best settlement on the requirements verification not on function that haven't been described that host extensive is only enormous, not assurance. The focus of the black box testing and technical functional of the test object is the functionality. Okay, the functionality. It is certainly undisputed that the correct function of the software system has the highest priority and thus a black box test procedure must always be used. Okay, wait. So, okay. Okay. Oh, wait a minute. I want to check if my recording is safe or not. Hmm.
Recording in progress.
I think it's a safe. Okay, let me continue. Okay, there's a white box test technique. White box technique. Test technique are based on the test object internal structure and are often referred so structure for structure based test. Like I think we need to pause. Wait a minute. Okay, we continue. Okay, there's a white box test technique. White box test technique are all based on the test object internal structure and are often referred as a structural or structural based test. Yeah. Another term of the test these techniques is the code-related testing. This type of test relies on the availability of the source code and availability to manipulate and adapt if necessary. But the test technique can be used on all test level, but the techniques described below are aimed separately at the component testing level. Alongside the techniques includes in the STBQ, the syllabus of the statement and decision testing. There are many other techniques that aim to achieve a greater attack the degree of the code coverage.
Recording in progress.
Okay. Okay. Um, Alongside the technique includes the STBQ. Okay. There's so many other techniques that's a greater okay. That therefore increase the testing toughness. This attack also test security for the business critical system. Okay. Every part of the code must be executed. The underlying concept of the white box testing is to make sure that all the part of test object code are executed at least once. The process-based test case are designed and executable based on the program logic. It is clear that the object specification also play a role in designing test case and also in deciding whether defective behavior has been detected when a test is run. The subject of the white box test technique can, for example, be the object statement, and the aim is to achieve a predefined degree of the coverage of the statement during this testing to get as many of the statement in the program to execute as possible. We can differentiate between the following type of white box test technique, like a statement testing, decision testing, condition testing, which is like a branch condition combination, modified condition decision coverage testing, and the path testing. The following section goes into detail on each of these techniques. Okay, there's a 5.2.1 statement testing coverage. The test object individual statement are the focus of this type of test. You need to identify test case that execute a predefined percentage of the program executable statement. These techniques can be illustrated and explained using a control flow graph, which can be created based on the source code. The graph illustrates the possible flow within the test object and enables you to precisely define the required coverage. Statements are represented by nodes and the control the flow by directed edge that connect the nodes. If the program contains a sequence of unconditional statement, this is represented by the only one node. As executing the initial statement leads to the execution of all the subsequent statements too. Selection statement like a if case and a loop while for have multiple exit edge. Once the test case have been run, you have to verify which individual statement were executed. If the required degree of the coverage has been achieved, the test is considered complete. Generally, you will need to execute all of the statement as it is impossible to judge whether the statement that hasn't been executed work as intended. Okay, this is example is based on a simple piece of a code that contains just a two if statement. Okay, like A is going to if to B and B is going to C with the if and if. Okay, and if and again if. Okay. Okay, in our example, all the statement can be reached using one single test case. This test case has to traverse all the edges in the following order, like A, B, C, D, F, D, A. A, B, F, G, H, D, A. A single test is enough, okay? Once all the edges have been traversed, all the statements, like a note, have been executed once. There are sure to be the other sequence that also provide 100% coverage. Remember though, that minimizing overall effort is one of the guiding principles of the testing. You need to fulfill the predefined degree of the coverage with as a few test cases as possible. The accepted behavior of the program that accepted result have to be defined based on the specification, and once the test has been executed, you need to compare the accepted result with the actual result in the order to identify any differences or failures. Yeah, that's defining exit criteria. The exit criteria for this type test can be clear defining using the following formula. The formula is statement coverage equivalent number of the executed statement divided total number of the statement multiplied 100%. Okay, this is a measurement calculation statement coverage is also known as C0. A corpus and provides only a weak exit reiteration. Citing 100% statement of coverage can be difficult. For example, if the program includes the exception, these are difficult to produce during a testing without expending a lot of the extra effort. Okay, that's a benefit and limitation, yeah. Defining the dead code, if 100% coverage is required, but some statement cannot be executed by any test case. This can be a sign of unreachable or dead code. And else, if a condition only executes the statement once it is fulfilled, the then part, and there is no else part, the control flow graph has then edges with at least one node starting at the condition of plus second out. Wait. Need to make sure if I already start the recording. Okay. Okay. Has then it's with least one dot starting at the condition plus a second outgoing else without any intermediate nodes. The control flow of these two edges is united at the terminal. A nodes of the if statement and the empty all edge between if and if is irrelevant when calculating statement coverage, and any missing statement in the part of the program will not be detected by using statement testing. Statement coverage is measured using appropriate tools. Okay, this is decision testing and coverage. A more advanced iteration for the whiteboard testing is a decision testing and coverage, whereby decision within the source code or the focus of the testing process. In this case, the effect of decision is assessed, and as a result, a decision is made as to which statement to execute next. This situation has to be considered during testing. Decision in the record are triggered by if and case statement, loops, and or similar statement. The query implicit in an if statement is analyzed with the boolean true or false, result is returned. Like in example, an if is a decision with a two possible outcome. A case or a switch statement has an outcome for each available option, including the default option. A decision test can be illustrated using a control flow graph, but other than referred to a branch testing with a corresponding branch coverage, this individual edge in the graph are the focus of the testing process. There's a side note as different decision branch testing. Okay. Decision test will assign a 50% coverage if the condition for a true is evaluated. An additional test case for false increase the coverage to the 100%. Empty else branches are factored in. Unlike in statement testing, it's irrelevant to decision testing whether the then and else part of the if statement contain a further statement. In a decision test, an empty else branch has to be included. Decision coverage demand that both branches that follow a query and all branches that follow a case statement are tested. In a loop, there is one branch to the loop body, one to the return of the to the start of the loop end if appropriate, one for bypassing the loop body. Okay, this is a test case again. Okay, this example for a branch test. For example, create additional test following as a sequence give a 100% statement coverage like A, B, F, G, H, D, A. However, the CI case is not executed in this case. Okay. This is C and K. It's all false outcome. There's a if statement. Just start loop. This may need to total the cases to generate 100% branch coverage like A, B, C, D, A, A, B, C, A, B, F, G, I, A, B, F, G, I, G, H, D, A, K, A. Expressed in the form of a decision with the only the single test case with a 100% statement coverage for the first if statement one outcome of the decision is missing, the key is executed during the test. The same applies for the second if statement. Furthermore, a prepared of the while loop the IH hasn't yet been tested. Taken together, the three cases provide complete operations of all the edges in our control flow graph. Okay. Likewise, all decision or more precisely, all decision outcome are covered by these three test cases. As in our example, is it often impossible to avoid executing some edge multiplied times here because there are no alternative path in the ANAS are executed by the all three test cases. Here too, the pre and post condition, the accepted result, and the test object accepted behavior have to be defined in the advance and compared with the test result to help identify runtime disappearances. It's also helpful to record that what decision outcome are delivered and or which branch are followed during the test. This is especially important when it comes to identifying missing statement isn't empty branches. Okay, there's a defined exit criteria. There's a decision coverage with equal number of test outcomes during tests. Divide the total number or of a possible decision outcome in the test object multiplies with a 100%. Okay, there's a decision coverage. It's a called C1 coverage. There's a calculation only look at whether a decision outcome branch or a branch is a traverse, not how often. In our example, the A and A branches. Okay, there is a side note. Assuming the final test, coverage is a 9 or 10 equal 9 divide 10 multiply 100% equal 90%. Coverage significant distribution complex. The final result is 100 because the total distribution is just because the process in the process compression. The exit criteria is defined according to the test object importing importance, the degree of risk involved if it fails. For example, 85% compression might be sufficient for the one component, whereas 100% is required for the another. As our example is illustrate, the greater the required degree of the coverage, the more testing effort this involves. Benefit and limitation is and branch testing also equals more test case than statement testing. To how many more depend on structure of the test object, and like statement test decision can verify the missing statement empty braces. 100% of decision toxic currently 100% statement compression with opposite is not true. Decision creation the individual process decision is at a subject or individual and individually of one another specific combination of program fragment or record. The statement decision are generally not comprehensive enough for a testing object-oriented system. The control flows within classes and the method are usually quite simple for to record compressed that can be accessible quickly easily. However, the complexity of the object-oriented system is usually hidden in the dependencies between the classes and their required formulating of the additional well complex complex criteria. Automated tools are often used to determine the required degree of the coverage for the statement and or decision coverage, and this can be utilized to identify uncalled methods and program parts too. Okay, there's a testing and condition. In the decision test, only the result logical values of decision are evaluated. Okay. The values are used to decide which outcome branch to follow and or which statement is executed next. If a decision comprises multiple conditions that are connected with using logical operator, this resulting complex had decoupled by zero testing. The following section is a sequence of testing documents by complex. This condition testing is defining atomic subcondition. The objective to branch condition testing is to the test every condition decision both via an example. For both a true and false value, condition contains no logical operator such an or not, and instead only relevant operator such as more or equal. A single decision contains the test contains the test object of multiple condition. This example, compound decision X more than 3 or yes. This is a procedure condition connected using logical OR. The objective for to prevent condition testing is to get a subcondition to assume about possible logical result. The test data X equals 6 and Y equals 8 is returned true for different condition. In the false for the second, there's a intersection only possible to or false. The second test data pair. The return of the false for the first condition and the true for the second. This is a on scan through the both condition and use the both logical using the both times. The branch condition is therefore a weak criteria for the decision test situation in the branch condition combination testing or branch condition combination combination. Okay, this example. Okay, this is continued. Let's another example. Let's get some data x. X is equal 6. T and T is mean true and F means a false. Decision outcome does not coverage but a possible and logical value. Wait, we check. This fulfilling the same criteria as a decision test is a comprehensive criteria as it also takes a compound decision into the account that the downside of the technique is that the number of a possible combination increases exponentially with the number of conditions. This is example, and then modify the condition decision compressor testing with the MCDC. Okay, limited the combination, or this is for a limiting the combination to modify the condition decision compressor testing confirm the usual outline above. You don't need to test all the possible combination of logical values of a condition, but only those for a changing a single Boolean value of a condition in a decision change the result of the decision. In other words, you only need to test a condition for which changing a Boolean value is changed for resulting decision. Okay, this example. For the first condition, so condition is calculate and calculate conditions from the true and a false to the false, or the final result decision remains in some opposite directional equation. But the first combination is some false, the false decision combination the testing first combination and the foreign combination oriented. So purpose the second test decision change a true and a false and the value decision is called value condition values. Keeping the number of test case low for every logical operator in a compound decision, you have to determine which test cases are sensitive to the error and which combination of a condition can mark failures. The latter can then be left out at the testing stage. The test case for every test case, you need to know which input value leads to which evaluation of each condition and which program part of the due is executed as a result. In order to correctly identify whether a value is present, you need to define accepted output and or behavior of the test object in advance testing. Okay, however, during modified condition is testing, it can be hard for finding the input of values that produce the logical values and conditions required by the individual test case, defining exit criteria. As for the all previous technique testing, here's to the test completion criteria can be defined from the relationship between the SIF and the possible logical value for the condition and decision. For cases in which the complexity of the decision in the test object goes on the focus of the test, it is a prudence to aim for 100% coverage. If a decision complexity is not relevant to the test at hand, decision at testing is usually sufficient. A benefit and limitation. If a compound, a decision occur in the code, then it should be tested thoroughly to be sure of identifying any failure. Mistakes are often made to combine logical operators, so thorough testing is a key. Remember though, the designing effective modified condition decision covered test cases involves a lot of effort. Or tips can be divided to compound. Decision is a simple if statement, and the decision test is resulting sequence. Wait a minute. Okay, that's like have a remaining time for meeting. Okay, I think we need to stop in here. Okay, this is like to disable. Okay, I think we need to stop for a while and continue in other meeting. Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.